Welcome to the Coffee Break Show today. Today, I got Darryl Stickel on with me, and we are going to be talking about the number one thing that will improve your business, improve your credibility, improve your life, and deepen your relationships. Want to know what that is? We'll be right back. You're on the Success Secrets for Business, Family, and Life channel. This is the Coffee Break Show. I'm Vickie Helm. Darryl, welcome to the Coffee Break Show. I cannot wait to geek out on this topic that we're going to be talking about today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Vickie. It's really important that we get the message out, and I'm really glad you've had me aboard.
You know, Darryl, I got to tell you, this is my number one talk that I talk about right now in public. And I want to just take the cat out of the bag for everybody. We are going to be talking about the importance of trust and how it can build mountains for you or dissolve the mountain you're on. And Darryl, the first question I have is, how on earth did you decide, how did you look at this? How did this become a fascination for you? I mean, you've been a professor at Duke University, named you as the leader for global business and NGOs, and you have done so many things in your life around getting business to be better and better and better. And the number one thing you found is that trust. Trust is one of the most important things. How did you get to be this expert on this?
So part of it is the journey that I've taken. Um, and I agree with you. Trust is critical to everything we do. And it's the differentiator between those who are just okay as leaders and those who are exceptional. Um, I started out in a small community in northern Canada, and it was fairly isolated. Conditions were pretty rugged. Not uncommon for it to be minus 40. Um, the phrase "too cold to snow" was something I heard often. And so growing up in that environment, you had to pull together. There's this sense of community, and it wasn't that everyone was nice or everyone was, an angel, but far from it. But we all knew that we had to help each other. And I had a series of experiences growing up that pushed me to have a greater sense of empathy than most.
Mhm.
And I eventually went to college, went to university in Victoria, British Columbia, and I'd be sitting on the bus, Vickie, and someone would just come and sit down next to me and say, "I'm really having a hard time." So
Wow.
complete strangers would just open up to me for some reason. And I sort of, there were a few thoughts that went through my head as this kept happening. I thought, why is this happening? What is it that's provoking this? And the second thought was, if this is going to keep happening, maybe I should get paid for this. Um, and so I started moving towards clinical psychology. I was working with families in crisis and troubled teens, and working on crisis lines and honing those skills so that I would be really good in that field. And I got partway there, and I realized that a lot of the families I was working with were just doing the best they could, and they couldn't get from A to B. And I thought, this will drive me insane. And so I shifted and I went into public administration, and I was working in native land claims here in British Columbia. And they would ask me these deep philosophical questions like, what is self-government? Or what will the province look like 50 years
Yeah.
after claims are settled?
Ooh.
And the last question they asked me was, how do we convince a group of people we've shafted for over 100 years they should trust us? That's a really good question.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yes, that is a powerful question.
And I said, well, maybe it would help if we were trustworthy, you know, which didn't get nearly the response one would hope. And shortly thereafter, I went to Duke, and I wrote my doctoral thesis on building trust in hostile environments, because I wanted to understand what made these conflicts so resilient, even when they weren't benefiting anyone.
Yeah.
And so I started down this path trying to understand how trust works, and how people make the decision to trust, and if there were things we could do about it, to make it better.
Yes. Yes, that is so incredible. I know that um, during your travels and everything else, as you progress in years, you also wrote the book. And the book is on trust and how to build trust in business and in the world. And what I think is interesting about it is if you want to go to Amazon or wherever to get this book, um, he's one of the world's leading experts on trust. And this is something that's so important. He's the author of Building Trust. That's the name of the book. It's exceptional leadership in an uncertain world. And that's what we're really needing right now.
Yeah.
Exceptional leadership because we're living in this uncertain world. And in my opinion, Darryl, it's going to become more uncertain before it becomes certain again. There is going to be a very big period of lostness.
Yeah.
One of the things you said, Darryl, I would like to expand on a little bit, both in working life and in family life and everything else. You said when you were growing up in this very rural part of Canada where it was like 40 below, there was a need for your neighbors. And one of the things that I think we haven't got to the point in the world with is needing each other in a healthy way and not
Yeah.
codependent. And I would like to say, what is healthy needing and healthy working together?
Wow, that's a good question. Um, you're you're experienced at this.
I
Um,
am.
yeah. So, in part, for me, trust is a combination of uncertainty and vulnerability,
Mhm.
and we become vulnerable to one another
Yes.
when we need help.
Mhm.
And we need someone to come alongside. When I look at the world, I struggle a bit, Vicky, because we see these complex problems. Things like climate change, things like race relations, things
Yeah.
like the political divide. They are complex social issues that require us to pull together, right? They
Yes.
require collective collaborative action. And our trust levels are the lowest we've ever seen.
Yes. In
And
fact, wasn't it that what is it, the Edelman Trust Barometer that's like
Edelman,
the
yeah,
lowest Edelman, thank you. It's the lowest in history or something right now?
yeah, yeah, and it's been in decline for over a decade,
Wow.
um, and it just every year they keep saying the same thing. This is the lowest we've ever seen. No, now this is the lowest we've ever seen. And against this backdrop, people are talking about how damaging that is and how important it is that we pull together because trust is a social lubricant. It allows us to function. It is clearly aligned with how well communities do, how well organizations do. We see that we need to pull together often,
Yes.
and our inability to do so is slowing everything. You know, we
Yes.
we trust people all the time. You go to a restaurant, you get in a cab, you get on an airplane. You believe the pilot's made it through all 12 steps of that substance abuse program. And and so we find ourselves trusting people often, and it's what allows us to thrive. And so,
Yeah.
you know, I'm in a fairly unique position because, not totally unique, but unusual in that I'm legally blind and I have my guide dog Drake who helps me navigate the world. And
Mm.
so I am vulnerable often where I need
Yes.
people's help and support. And I got to tell you, I have a different perspective of the world than most because I find people to be supportive and helpful and kind
Yes.
and just looking for a reason to do that. And it seems to generate this positive affect for me and for them.
Mm.
I was sitting in an airport in Denver, and I'm waiting for my flight, and this huge black guy comes up and he sits down next to me and he says, "Can I just say hi to your dog?" I said, "Of course." And so he's hanging out with Drake, and they're getting along, and the guy's fiance comes up and she goes, "We got to go. Our flight's going to take off." And he goes, "I'm just talking to Drake." And so she says hi to Drake, and they have this great moment, and then he gets up, and we have just a special moment together, right? He gets up and he leaves, and this woman comes from across the course and sits down next to me and says, "I'm on my way to Mexico. My mother's just had surgery. I'm wondering if I could just say hi to your dog." And I said, "Sure." And so she gets some love and affection from Drake. And then she gets up and somebody else comes. There were 6 people in a row that came and sat down next to
Wow.
us and just hung out with Drake. And they all had this positive time, and he loved it, because he's got such a warm heart. They needed that moment, right? And they were able to sit
Yes.
down and take it.
Yes.
And so we all have those moments where life would be just a little better if someone else came alongside and helped us out.
Yeah. That's a beautiful thing. I wanna talk about the vulnerability piece,
Yeah,
because while you were talking and you gave this example of going through the airport, I wondered to myself, you said 2 things that reflect something back to me. Are we distrustful because we're projecting distrust out into the world? Or are we distrustful because we have a lack of emotional intelligence in certain areas? Or are we distrustful just because we're distrustful? I mean, where are the key insights that we can have with ourselves to
right.
create more trust because we're knowing something?
So part of the struggle we have is this lack of awareness.
Yes.
And so we're not always aware of who we trust and how much we trust them.
Mhm.
Um, and I ask that question often, who do you trust? Give me examples. What would show me that you trust that person? And the
Yeah.
examples I get back are close, tight personal relationships. And when I flip that question and say, who trusts you? I get this long pause, right? And then people say, well, how would I know if someone trusts me or not? And fundamentally, my definition for trust is that it's the willingness to be vulnerable when we can't completely predict how someone else is going to behave. And so if we want to know if someone trusts us, we ask ourselves, how can they be vulnerable to us? And then are they? If I'm a leader, that means asking about real development needs and having them respond, having people push back against ideas that don't work, having
Yes.
people, ask difficult questions or disagree or try new things and risk failure. And, I can tell you, Vickie, that trust is a combination of uncertainty and vulnerability. So when we decide to trust, we ask ourselves 2 fundamental questions. The first question is, how likely am I to be harmed? Which is perceived uncertainty. The second question is, if I'm harmed, how bad's it going to hurt? Which is perceived vulnerability.
Yes.
And so it's uncertainty times vulnerability gives us a level of perceived risk. And
Yeah.
we each have a threshold of risk that we can tolerate. And if we go beyond that threshold, we don't trust. If we're beneath it, then we do.
Wow.
Our vulnerability hasn't changed, right? It hasn't really gone down. In fact, it may have gone up just a tick. But our uncertainty is
Yes.
bouncing all over the place. And so that's why we're having a harder time trusting right now, is
I
because
think that's so beautiful what you just said, Daryl. There's a couple of things for me that I think is spot on pinpointed that I wanna talk about because in the United States, there's been quite a lot of gun violence where people are
right.
now we're talking about types of vulnerability.
Yeah.
Well, we feel vulnerability with AI possibly replacing jobs or
Yep.
deep fakes being made, this massive shootings going on, political unrest. Other places feel vulnerable because of food and climate change and these disasters that are happening. And we are feeling more vulnerable. And
Right.
we are feeling more uncertainty in the world. And these are facts. And what's interesting about this is I want to know, Daryl, to me, trust is the only way through what's coming. And that's trusting your gut, trusting your heart, trusting another, and that building those kinds of relationships. What are 3 keys to building trust? Because I feel like I want to build more trust.
Mhm.
That means I'm not looking for people to trust. I want to be the example of trustworthiness. Do you
Yes.
understand what I'm saying?
I absolutely get what you're saying. Yeah,
And I would love to know what is like, can you offer us some insight as
absolutely.
to creating trustworthiness, so to speak?
So I think there are 10 levers that we can pull. And I walk through them systematically in my book, in the masterclass that I have on my website, in the courses that I deliver, in the coaching. Everywhere I go, the work that I do is showing people these levers and telling them how to pull them.
Brilliant.
And so, if we want to build trust, I told you it's uncertainty times vulnerability gives us a level of perceived risk.
That's right.
Well, first we need to understand, where does uncertainty come from? Because in early relationships, our uncertainty is really high. That means
Mhm.
we can only tolerate a small range of vulnerability. As I build a deeper relationship, the uncertainty comes down. That means the range of vulnerability I can tolerate starts to grow. That's what a deeper relationship looks like. So let's start by talking about, where does uncertainty come from? It comes
Yes.
from us as individuals, and it comes from the context that we're embedded in. And so there are three levers that we can think about that come from the individual perspective. And I love the way you talk about it. How do I show people that I'm trustworthy? And what I try to do is help people close the gap between how much they should be trusted and how much they actually are,
Yes.
communicating that effectively. So, three levers that I can pull to show that I'm trustworthy: benevolence, integrity, and ability.
Mm.
Benevolence is, do you have my best interest at heart?
Yeah.
And will you act in my best interest, even if it's not in your own short term best interest?
Yeah.
Integrity: do I follow through on my commitments, and do my actions line up with the values that I express? And ability: do I have the competence to do what I say I'm going to do?
Mhm.
So we all have the ability to build trust, but some are better than others. Those who aren't very good pull a lever. Usually it's the ability lever. I have these kinds of credentials, this much experience, this background. Those who are better have multiple levers that they can pull. And those who are
Mm.
really good have multiple levers, and they know when to pull which one. So let's start with the benevolence lever, right? I want to show you that I have your best interest at heart. So before we started recording, I asked you, what makes a great guest?
Yes, you were the first person who's ever asked me that.
And it's because I want you to be successful, right? And so when we start thinking about benevolence, we start thinking about, what is the other person's best interest? What does success look like for them? How do I show it in a way that lands? Because when I say benevolence, integrity, and ability, you're going to have people in your audience going, I do all that. I have leaders say that to me all the time. I do those things.
Yeah.
And I'll say, says who? Right? Because if
Mm.
it's me telling you I'm benevolent, it doesn't land nearly as well, Vickie, as if you think, yeah, Darryl's got my best interest at heart. Darryl cares about my audience. He wants them to be able to thrive and succeed.
Yeah.
And so I will be standing in front of a group of families, and I'll say, who here has their kids' best interest at heart? And all the hands go up.
Of course, yeah.
But when I flip that question and say, how many of your kids would say that? It's about a third.
Wow, now that is a big insight.
And so if it doesn't land when it's supposed to land, like it's supposed to be
Mhm.
obvious, then
Yeah,
how do we make it land in other places? And
yeah.
so what I do is I give people a template. And this is what I do in the book: is I walk through all the levers and the whole model, and then I describe the levers and how to pull them. So let's practice the benevolence lever. Let's say you and I are having a conversation, and I say to you, I heard this guy Darryl, he was talking about trust. He said that benevolence was really important. And that means having someone's best interest at heart. And
Mhm.
I think I do that, but it doesn't always seem to land that way. Have you ever experienced that, Vickie?
Oh god, that's beautiful. Just the way you said that was beautiful, and I'm gonna say yes.
Yeah,
I've
and
experienced that.
almost everyone has, right? Or they've
Yes.
seen it, right? Where you've tried to do the right thing for someone and it just backfires. And then the next phase of that question, we start to narrow the funnel. I said, well, Vickie, have you ever really had someone have your back? Really have someone look out for you?
Yeah.
What did they do? What did that look like?
Oh God, that's so interesting. If I had to say it, I would use the 5 love languages, and they know my love languages, and they act within those love languages, and they have concern for me, and they communicate with me in a way that helps me see that they're trying to love me and trying to
Right.
have my back.
So now I've gotten some hints, right? I've gotten a sense of, you know, if I came to understand the 5 love languages better, I could frame my responses to you in a way that would land.
Yes.
And I'm getting a better sense of how to narrow this funnel further and be transparent. So, what does
Mhm.
success look like for you, Vicky? What would it look like if I was benevolent?
Well, when you were speaking, Daryl, just a second ago, one of the things that popped into my mind that changed my life, it's like my Bible, but I practice, study, do nonviolent communication by Marshall Rosenberg. And the reason
Yeah.
I did that was because it actually helped me express what I wanted to express and not kind of hide behind what I didn't know. And so I learned this way of speaking with people and myself that help me connect more. So I think connecting on a deep, authentic level, that is one way that I feel seen or loved or supported or understood. And that to me is probably what I would say best.
Okay. And am I hitting the right
Yes.
button right now? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And so now we've actually opened this up and I can be transparent moving forward
Hmm.
about trying to be benevolent
Yeah.
and about the way that I communicate. And so, you know, people assume that being benevolent always means being nice. It doesn't. It means having the other person's best interest at heart.
Yes. And that's a big deal right now, Daryl, what you said, because there is a lot of copywriters out there who are absolutely trying to write copy that manipulates you into taking an action, which
Right.
may not be or have your best interest at heart. It may have their best interest at heart.
Right.
And this is the beauty of what you're saying, the integrity level of having their best interest at heart.
Yeah. So if I'm a leader and someone comes to me and says what success looks like to me is getting a promotion, well then the benevolent response is to say, okay, I'm going to start holding you more accountable. I'm going to start giving you
Mhm.
more responsibility. I'm going to start spotlighting you more because I'm not the only one who's deciding whether you get and deserve a promotion.
Yes,
I need to
yes,
be able
yeah,
to make that case. And so I need you to start acting like you would if you were in that new role.
yeah.
And I'm going to hold you to that and be tougher on you. That's what benevolence starts to look like. And when we
That's
start
so interesting.
when we start to do that and people have that story about us because we
Mhm.
interpret the world through stories, then it starts to feel like, oh, when he gives me tough feedback, when Darryl gives me, you know, extra
Yeah.
assignments, when Darryl he's doing this because he wants to help me get where I want to go.
Mhm.
And I had that experience with my son who wanted to get a baseball scholarship, and I said to him, that means you have to work hard. That means you have to have good relationships with your coaches. That means you have to get good grades. You're going to have to be a good teammate. There's all these things that people are going to be evaluating. And now I'm cueing him and nudging him about those things, which could sound like nagging, but instead he interprets as dad's got my back.
I love that you said this because when you were talking about it there for a minute, Daryl, I was thinking this is the land of Olympic athletes. I mean, people who really say, I want to have more, do more, be more. And someone is saying, okay, we'll hold you accountable by giving you more, doing more, and being more. And at that point, you either meet that level or you don't. And in those instances, when you are asking for the trust of others, when they hold you accountable, that to me is the first point of trust. I'm
Yeah.
willing to hold you accountable because if I didn't believe that you were capable of doing these things, I wouldn't hold you accountable. My day and my time is mine and I don't want to waste it. And I think good leadership is about, making that decision as to whether you're going to hold somebody accountable. But Darryl, there's something about the way you said it, because I think verbal skills and tonality create the most trust.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think leaders and managers are like, fine, if you want this, I'm going to hold you to, yeah, a higher standard. I'm going to do this and this and this and this. And it sounds painful and stressful. It doesn't sound like you're connecting in a way that is building trust.
Right.
I want to know, how important is it when we use tone? Because you're naturally vulnerable in your tone, and
Right.
it's very comforting to talk to you, actually. And you're so good at it right now. And I know that, I wonder, what kind of tonality do we need to have to be or sound trustful? And I'm certain that it depends on the situation. But I'm wondering, what are your thoughts and what kind of tips can you give us around
Wow.
that?
So a lot of the work I do is around having more of a coach approach or more of a Socratic
Hmm.
questioning,
Yeah.
because it doesn't provoke the same level of defensiveness.
Hmm.
And you're absolutely right. There is something about me that still triggers people to want to open up. And I've had
Yes.
students say to me, you feel strong but safe. Um,
Yes.
and I feel like I can tell you things and it's going to be okay. And you're not going to respond in a negative way. You're not going to lash out. You're not going to lose your temper. And you're absolutely right. There is a method of the language that we use. You talked about nonviolent communication. There's the approach we use, the questions that we ask, the way we present this. Um, and when I was in academia, one of my advisors said to me, he goes, we'll have other academics come in and they'll speak, and you'll ask a question. And he said, and me and all the other senior academics all sit back and smile because we've seen this before. And we don't know where you're going, but it's going to be interesting. And we're really glad we're not standing up there. Said, because you just ask a series of questions and then all of a sudden the person realizes, oh my God, there's a gaping hole.
Yeah.
And he said, and they don't get defensive. It becomes a collaborative effort to solve that.
Hmm.
And so, I worked with a father who was struggling with his kids. They were 3 and 5. And this is when I was teaching in Luxembourg. And he said, I'm alienated from them. I always do the wrong thing. I get frustrated. I get angry. I lash out. And he said, I'm terrified. And I think this relationship is broken forever. And I started coaching him and working with him. He was one of my students. And the final project for my students was to apply the model to a relationship. And so he applied it to his 2 sons. And at the end of the 3-month course, he said,
Wow.
okay, so things have completely changed. My sons run to me now. They throw themselves on me, tell me they love me all the time. They fight over who gets to sit next to me at dinner. They beg me to read them stories. They can't get enough time with me. And so this is something, it's a skill that we can teach.
Yes. Yes. And what I want to go a little deeper into that,
Yeah,
because one of the things that I know for myself, if I had to evaluate what makes me trustworthy, what makes me have the kind of trust that is lovingly given to me, one of them is discernment. The
right.
thing about discernment is, in the moment, wherever I am in the moment, when somebody steps into my realm and I really listen without a conversation in the back of my head going. I want to listen with some sense of openness, because I'm not sure, what's happening. It's like when somebody sits next to you in the bus or in the car or wherever they are, and they're just talking to you suddenly. And
Right.
so, in the moment, maybe the divine put you there in the moment to listen or talk to them. And sometimes people don't want your advice. They want
Yeah.
somebody who's just willing to be present. And being discerning and present creates trust, not necessarily the knowledge you have. It's the presence that you have with someone. And you spoke earlier about awareness. Some people just don't have the awareness. And I'm wondering, in that trusting, because I think trust is multi-layered,
It is.
multi-leveled, and applying these things to build trust means that you have to be willing to be present in the moment with what's here now without your ego in the way or charging forward like I got to solve the problem for them or they want my advice or they need my help. Maybe they don't want your help. And how do you evaluate what depends on the moment, but how
Yeah.
do you evaluate what is needed in that moment to build trust?
Yeah. And so that's a brilliant question. Um, and partly it's just been doing this my whole life,
Mhm.
and I have experience. Um, but I've been able to train other people to do it, and so partly it's about one of my mantras is ask, listen, respond, and so
Mm.
we first try to engage the other person and see where the gap is, and we pay attention to what they need, and and so there's really an effort to do some perspective taking,
Yeah.
and first we seek to understand. And so if someone comes to me and they're unburdening themselves or they're struggling with something, my first act is to let them know that they've been hurt and
Yeah.
that I'm there with them and I'm paying attention. And then it's questions to clarify, right? Trying to get a clearer sense and trying to help them expunge some of that, get some of that out.
Yeah.
And then we start asking, can I be helpful? Is there a way that I can help you? What would success look like for you from this exchange, from this interaction? Um, do you just need to be heard? Or,
Mhm.
you know, can I tell you a story about where I've experienced a similar situation so you don't feel quite so alone?
Yes.
Um, so that I show you that I understand, that I
Yeah.
have empathy for you. Um, those are a big part of, you know, the approach that I use and the model that I use. A lot of it's around questions to start and including that other person. You know, if you and I want to talk about pulling the ability lever, for example,
Mhm.
showing you that I'm really good at what I do, I could come on here and I could say, I've got a PhD and I've done this for 20 years and I was nominated as one of the world's thought leaders on trust, blah, 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 right? But that doesn't really hit the mark. What's better is for me to say to you, what does a great guest look like? And
Yes.
and then for us to actually say to your audience, your listeners, what would be really thought provoking for you? What would make the time you spend with Vickie and her
Interesting.
guest really meaningful? What does a great guest look like from your perspective?
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of the work I do is really around perspective taking and including the other person.
You know, I love that you're saying this, and the reason I love that you're saying this is because the whole time that I've been speaking with you, Darryl, there has been this kind of willingness to accept responsibility for your portion of the moment. And I
Right.
don't mean like it was a bad fight or anything else. I mean, in a gentle, kind way, you being present with you allows you to be present with someone else.
Right.
And in that time that you're talking, you're the statements that you make are all about you checking in with you and then checking in with them
Right.
and making sure that they've been heard. And then the first thing that you do, kind of unconsciously or consciously, I don't know, is checking in with yourself. And one of the things I think about trust is if you don't trust yourself, how can you trust another? It's kind
Right.
of like when they say, if you can't love you, how do you expect another to love you? This thing about trusting the self, I know a lot of people who spend a lot of time distrusting them and distrusting everyone else. How do we build trust with ourselves so that we become a little more aware of, you know, building trust in the world?
So one of the challenges and one of the great things about human beings is we interpret the world through stories.
Mhm.
It's how we make sense of the world.
Mhm.
And part of my role as a dad is to have a relentlessly positive story about my sons,
Yeah.
right? And so I interpret new information about them in a positive way. I help them reinterpret the world through the lens that I see for them.
Mm.
And, you know, I I explain things in a way to them that makes sense for them, that allows them to it's a safe harbor from which they can take risks. And part of what I learned from that is that there are stories I can tell about myself. I'm legally blind. Your people who are watching us can see that I'm, follically challenged. My hair's receding at a rapid pace. Um, and there are all kinds of negative things I could say about myself, right?
Mhm.
And so I could have this profoundly negative story, or I could have a profoundly positive story. And I get to choose that
Mhm.
every day. And there are different stories about this dilemma that we face. Which wolf do we feed?
Yes,
Which
yes, yeah.
narrative do we listen to? And I find for me that there are things that make me feel better, right? There's things that make me happier. And if I make a conscious choice to do those just a little more often, the ones that are within my control, like I'm envisioning one of your listeners taking this conversation that we're having and having a different interaction with someone else and it being successful.
Yeah.
That feels fulfilling for me. And the
Mhm.
connection that you and I are having feels fulfilling for me. And those positive moments I have with my sons where they are thriving and successful and amazing young men, that's fulfilling for me. And so when I start to realize that it's okay that I have flaws and that it's okay if I need to ask for help or reach out to others, that doesn't diminish me as a human being. That's part of the human equation where I need to reach out to others for help and I am here to give help in return.
Mm.
So that's, for a blind guy who's suffered a number of concussions, I've got a really positive story about the world.
Beautiful. I love that you get to choose the story, and no matter how many times we hear about the wolf, which wolf are you going to feed? That is, you can't hear it enough. It's
Yeah.
just like, which wolf if every morning we got up and said, "Which wolf are you gonna feed today?" Then we'd have a little more where I'm gonna feed this wolf and not this wolf. We'd
Yeah.
find ourselves growing and developing and, remembering who we are. I want to talk about your program a little bit right now because a
Sure.
lot of people see leadership programs as, ROIs and bottom lines and hiring and this and that. But for me, I can't emphasize this enough to everyone listening. Trust is the number one thing you need to have before somebody says yes to your opportunity, before somebody is willing to work with you and work as an employee for you and stay long term. If I could tell you the best gift that you could develop as a human being is trust. Trust in the way that we're talking about it right now. It is singularly the most important skill set that you can develop right now. And for me, what has helped me grow my success is that people have trusted me. They've trusted me with their ideas. They've trusted me with their money. They've trusted me with investment advice. They have trusted me to say, start this business or don't buy that business. Trust is the great equalizer. It doesn't matter what a great consultant you are or you aren't if you don't have trust.
Yeah.
If you're marketing at the top of the market and you don't have trust, it doesn't work. So one of the things that I think every leader, and I'm talking not just business leader, but school leader, any kind of leader, even a Facebook group leader, the number one thing that you can develop right now is trust. And his masterclass is what I want to talk about, because this is the trust leadership program that will help you begin to raise. If you're going to make any investment in your career, in your life, in your business, building trust is the number one investment that I think everyone needs to be in there. Let's talk a little bit about your master class. And also, I want to know how people can, be involved in it and everything else.
So the master class is, I've got sort of three levels of engagement. The lowest level is the book. The master class is sort of the next phase up, and it's about a 3-hour course. It's broken up into 5-minute segments. Um, and what it does is it systematically walks people through, here's how trust works, and here's things you can do about it. Because I agree with everything you just said, Vickie. It's one of the prime differentiators for leaders. The more senior we become, the less direct control we have over outcomes. The more dependent we are on everyone else to achieve our goals and objectives. And it's something that's within your control. It's a skill that we can build. And so when people go through the masterclass, they'll see, you know, short videos about here's why trust matters, here's how to think about it. Now, here's what to do about it. And there's role plays and exercises that people can engage in to practice some of these skills. And what we've been hearing back from folks who've taken the course is that it profoundly changes the way they engage the world and leads to really positive results for them. And I
Mhm.
developed both the book and the masterclass because I was having these huge impacts on folks, and it felt like I was dropping grains of sand in the ocean.
Mhm.
And what I need is your listeners and you to come alongside and help me pick up great big rocks
Mm.
and start collectively moving towards higher trust levels by developing our skills as individuals. And so I'm really trying to scale this effort. I sometimes feel like Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill because a lot of people are talking about the importance of trust and the lack of it, but virtually no one is talking about how to build it.
Yes.
And I've had leaders who are really technically skilled but struggle on the people side say
Mhm.
to me, "Oh my God, you've given me a formula. It just makes sense. It feels so intuitive." And so I've tried to present everything that I do in a way that people get it. Regular people get it. You don't have to have a PhD to understand what I'm talking about. And so it's filled with stories and narratives, and it's filled with examples and practical exercises that people can do to start trying some of these things and changing the way that they engage the world.
I love that. I love it. Absolutely some of the best leadership training you could ever have. And I know a lot of people that are super, super talented, and they have great products and services and just can't get them out to the general public or
Right.
out, because that need for trust is, it's so big right now. It is absolutely one of the biggest things. And I know a lot of people will say it. They'll talk, well, you need trust, blah, blah, blah. This is a skill set that I believe is lifelong learning for me.
Yeah.
And the more trust that I gather, the more successful I become, because it's just that you can sell more. It's like, if you look at the billionaire that Oprah is, she built her billionaire off of trust.
Right.
It's why, if you're an author, you can go on the show and she says, buy this book, and 500,000 copies will sell in an hour and 2 hours after that show airs. It's not because she's Oprah, it's because she has built that trust so thoroughly
Yeah.
that it has carried her to billionaire status.
Well, and building higher trust, I used to work for McKinsey and Company, big management consulting firm,
Mhm,
and they
mhm.
they charged 3 times what anyone else charged. And they were able to charge that premium because they were more trusted than their competitors.
Yeah.
And I've seen this time and time again. We see that trust leads to higher returns to shareholders, higher employee retention, higher engagement. We see people wanting you to succeed and willing to go the extra mile to help you do that.
Yes.
Um, it's really powerful stuff. And like I said, we have the lowest trust levels we've ever seen. It's become even more valuable than it's ever been. and we need to be intentional about it. The things we did to build trust 10 years ago don't work as well anymore because the uncertainty's gotten higher and our sense of vulnerability has increased. And so we need to be able to be thoughtful and create a shared vocabulary. I work with a large organization, SAP. They're a huge software company. And I work with this woman, Kelsey Trigg, who's the global VP of HR advisors. And so she's got 8,000 clients. And I worked with her team, and her team gets trust scores that are through the roof. Their customer satisfaction scores are through the roof. And she said, it's because we have the same vocabulary. We
Yeah.
went through your course. We use the language all the time. It allows us to talk about things we normally don't talk about in a way we wouldn't normally talk about them.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say to all the entrepreneurs and leaders or people out there understanding the power of trust, if you deepen your ability to have trust with people, you'll have more success. So while everybody's out there trying to figure out the uncertainty, go ahead right now and go to Darryl. Darryl, what website is where can they
Trustunlimited.com. So go to Trust,
trustunlimited.com.
and you'll find on there under the courses section is the masterclass. There's a link to the book there, which you
Great.
can find anywhere on Amazon or anywhere else. Um, you can reach out to me, Darryl at trustunlimited.com, if you want coaching or a more
Mhm.
in-depth course that we offer, which goes beyond the masterclass. Yeah, and you know, happy to help people figure this stuff out.
Thank you. I'd like to say that listening to you today has melted my heart. I mean, literally melted my heart because you can hear about all the bad things that are happening in the day. But then there's people like you who are out in the world, connecting the world, putting those pieces back together. And that's the real work, isn't it? That's the
Yeah.
real work right now. And the more people do that, the more transformation in humanity will become better and happier and more joyful and more trustful. And I just want to say thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for being on the show today. It has been it's such a heartfelt conversation to have. And it is something that I am so, so passionate about and something that I talk about all the time because that trust factor is huge. And I just want to say thank you for being on the show today. I really enjoyed having you here.
Well, I want to thank you as well, Vickie, for helping me get the word out. I mean, I'm trying to get the signal through the noise, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to tell people there's something we can do about this, and
Yeah.
and it's not impossible. So, thank you for helping me do that, and thanks to your listeners for sticking with us.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Listen, every week we bring the best experts from around the world on the Coffee Break Show. Darryl Stickel, thank you for being on the show today. We'll see you guys next week with another wonderful world class expert. Talk to you later.